Thank you for finding the time.
Hello there, people. The new series Daredevil Born Again has dropped fresh episodes, and attorney-turned-vigilante Matt Murdock is keeping very busy with his dating life. The woman in question is Heather Glenn, a sought-after therapist and a best-selling author. Heather Glenn and Matt Murdock meet for the very first time in a coffee shop. It was actually a date orchestrated by Matt's new law firm partner, but neither of them was aware of it. Matt was told Heather needed legal advice, and Heather was informed that Matt was seeking professional therapy. So, the date took off on an awkward note, with Heather saying she would never date a lawyer because their hours suck, and they argue about everything. A few flirty exchanges later, they got talking, and soon enough, Matt even asks her for her number from his colleague. On his second date with Heather, Matt hears the news that Wilson Fisk, AKA crime lord Kingpin, has been elected as the mayor of New York City and gets visibly disturbed when Heather tells him, "You can't carry the weight of a city on your shoulders." They end the night with a kiss. P.S. Daredevil and Kingpin are old enemies, and they recently exchanged threats about interfering in each other's business. Anyhow, as Matt and Heather's romance blooms, Heather gets busy with secret new clients. Ta-da! It's Wilson Fisk and his wife Vanessa, who are looking to save their marriage. Signing a non-disclosure agreement, Heather cancels her date with Matt to speak to Wilson Fisk, who is unaware that Heather is the girlfriend of his arch-enemy, Daredevil. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Who is Heather Glenn? What was Heather's early life like? While we don't know much about Heather Glenn's background in Daredevil Born Again, other than she's from Queens, this character has featured prominently in Matt Murdock's life in Marvel Comics and comes with quite a bit of history. Heather Glenn first appeared in Daredevil's 126th issue, published in 1975. The character was created by Marv Wolfman, who also conceptualized Blade and Bullseye, and drawn by artist Rob Brown. She was introduced as a young and wealthy socialite, but also an emotionally vulnerable one. Growing up in a rich household, Heather also had a penchant for helping the less fortunate. In connection with Matt Murdock, Heather was one of Daredevil's many romances that ended tragically, and we'll get to that in just a minute. Heather was born in an affluent New York family. Her father, Maxwell Glenn, was the CEO of the prestigious Glenn Industry, which was one of the biggest names in the corporate landscape. The Glenn residence was located at the heart of New York City, signifying the Glenn family's wealth and social standing. Growing up with a luxurious lifestyle, Heather went to a premium school and attended the most elite parties. Thus, undoubtedly, Heather's personality was shaped by affluence and sophistication. How did Heather meet Matt Murdock? Heather had the spare keys to her ex-boyfriend Frankie's brownstone apartment. A few months after Frankie seemingly broke up with Heather and vacated the apartment, Matt Murdock had moved in there. And when Heather saw the lights were on from outside, she opened the doors to find Matt Murdock inside. Recovering from a broken heart, Heather was charmed by Matt's handsomeness and polite mannerisms, and left the apartment by kissing Matt on the cheek. Heather persistently flirted with Matt and stayed in touch despite some resistance, and even expressed her feelings for him. Heather used to accompany Matt to their law firm, Nelson and Murdock, owned by Matt and his best friend, Foggy Nelson. She was quite instrumental in setting up the storefront legal clinic to provide legal advice to the Hell's Kitchen residents with lesser means. Heather also used to comfort Matt after stressful days, and together they watched the news filled with misinformation, wondering about the state of the country. Clearly smitten by Matt, Heather used to bring donuts to the storefront and was visibly jealous. Foggy's half-sister Candace kissed Matt. Frustrated by Matt's absence and indifference, Heather decided to open up to Foggy and talk about the importance of Matt in her life. Meanwhile, by this time, Matt was torn between annoyance at Heather's constant presence and his growing fondness for her. He began avoiding Heather, realizing he was falling in love. Meanwhile, during the investigation of a storefront case, Glenn Industries' name came up as they were seemingly involved in illegal activities. Who had high regard for her father as an honest man, began questioning his activities. When Matt became busier with the investigation, Heather began pestering him with queries, as the news only consisted of misinformation. Heather was still unaware of Matt's vigilante persona, and when the news broke that Daredevil apparently killed 3 cops, which was actually orchestrated by the villainous character Jester, Matt was visibly disturbed, and Heather was the one to comfort him. In time, Heather and Matt grew closer and eventually shared a passionate kiss. Heather was also by Matt's side when Matt's friend and longtime love interest, Karen Page, was kidnapped, and also when there was an attempt on Foggy Nelson's life. What role did the Purple Man play in Heather's life? The Purple Man's involvement in Heather's life turned everything topsy-turvy. Zebediah Kilgrave, aka the Purple Man, was a spy turned supervillain who could control people's minds using pheromones. This baddie mind-controlled Heather's dad Maxwell and got him involved in embezzlement and other illegal activity. When one Debbie Harris is kidnapped, the storefront investigations point towards the involvement of Glenn Industries. Matt informs a heartbroken Heather that Daredevil has discovered that Maxwell's assistant Mr. Stone is the one carrying out the illegal activity, but she was slightly relieved to learn her dad wasn't behind the kidnapping. While going through an emotional turmoil herself, Heather also helped out Matt with the cases at the storefront legal clinic and stood by him during a gang war in the neighborhood. Meanwhile, Daredevil has a confrontation with the villainous Boris and Ninotchka, and Matt returns injured when Heather nurses him back to health, but he ventures out again to face Bullseye. Heather rushes to the police station with Foggy, but is surprised to find her dad, Maxwell, surrendering himself for unimaginable crime. Distraught, Heather quits the storefront, but is later comforted by Matt. Heather gets all the more frustrated when Matt says he believes Maxwell is innocent, but is unable to defend him in court. Then onward, Heather visits her father regularly in jail, trying to get him to open up, but Maxwell seems distant and insists on his guilt. Soon after, Heather encounters Daredevil and learns of her father's suicide in jail. Heather also discovers that the Purple Man manipulated her father to commit the crimes and also forced him to take his own life. She also learns of Matt's vigilante identity as Daredevil and breaks up with him in a fit of rage. The Purple Man now starts mind-controlling Heather, stopping her from going to her dad's funeral when she seeks help from Daredevil. The blind superhero is forced to fight other adversaries, while the Purple Man manipulates Heather into holding a gun to her head. With help from the mercenary Paladin, Daredevil defeated the Purple Man and saved Heather's life. She retreated into Daredevil's arms, though still despising him for not being able to save Maxwell's life. When Matt took Heather to her father's grave, she asked him to prioritize a life with her over being a vigilante, something which Matt denied. An emotional Heather parted ways with him and went on to date disco dancer Rico to make Matt envious. Later, during a battle between Hulk and Daredevil, Heather emotionally shouted out the name Matt, revealing she's still in love with Murdock. What happened with Glenn Industries in his will? Maxwell Glenn had granted Heather his company and portions of his bonds and stock. Heather became the head of the board and attempted to reinstate the company's reputation, which was at the brink of bankruptcy because of Maxwell's criminal dealing. She suspected something fishy. When a board member held a secret meeting about selling off their New Jersey electronics, she discovered it was a shady deal. And upon Matt's encouragement, she delved deeper into the company's holding and discovered the New Jersey plant deal was an illegal one. This was when the villainous Dr. Octopus intervened and stole adamantium from the plant to enhance his tentacle. Heather broke free and struck Doc Ock with a shard of glass shortly before Daredevil arrived, and the two rekindled their romance with a kiss. However, frustrated by Matt's constant absence and his obsession with Glenn Industries' illicit dealing, Heather started taking business classes and began refocusing on her company. This is when Matt proposed marriage, and Heather realized she would have to give up her business for a domesticated life. Heather rejected the proposal, but soon learned that her company executive, Mr. Spindle, was carrying on another wrongful deal with Atreus Plastic to create plastic explosives. Meanwhile, Matt kept pressuring Heather to give up her business and sneakily launched legal investigations into Glenn Industries in order to bring about the company's downfall. To retain her role at Glenn Industries, Heather was forced to sign documents by Mr. Spindle, who later shifted the blame of the illegal deals to Heather and challenged her efficiency. This is when Matt intervened, but while he promised to save Heather's reputation, he also promised the downfall of Glenn Industries. What were the circumstances of Heather's death? Following the chaos and legal cases against Glenn Industries, Heather decided to accept Matt's proposal, but resorted to heavy drinking. During one such drunken episode, she stumbled upon Black Widow at Matt's apartment. Black Widow and Foggy Nelson were of the opinion that Heather and Matt bring out the worst in each other and decided to send out fake letters of rejection to the engaged couple. When Heather read the letter, believing it was from Matt, she completely broke down and only found solace in drinking. To cope with the breakup, Heather busied herself with innumerable dates, but was unable to move one. In an inebriated state, she ended up desperately calling Matt, saying it was an emergency. Daredevil, who was on his way to handle a domestic abuse situation, decided to reunite with his former fiancée. But upon reaching Heather's house, he found her drunk and realized she faked the emergency so that Matt would come to her first. Soon enough, Matt learned that the domestic abuse victim, who was ignored because of Heather, had died. Frustrated, he rejected Heather again and stomped off. Subsequently, Matt also ignored her many calls, only answering them once. Sinking into depression, Heather decided to take her own life and wrote a farewell note addressing it to Foggy before hanging herself in her apartment. When Matt learns of Heather's death from Foggy, he rushes to the house only to find Heather's lifeless body. These tragic events take place in issue number 220 of the Daredevil comics, published in 1985, and was written by influential Batman writer Denny O'Neil. What is Heather's legacy? Matt and Heather's tragic love story was one of the darkest chapters of Daredevil comics. In her farewell letter, Heather apologized to Foggy and to the world for her whimsical actions. Matt continued to blame himself for Heather's death, and fraught with guilt, he visited Heather's grave time and time again to mourn, and also to share the news that Daredevil recovered the industrial patents from Heather's house that a businessman had stolen after her death. During one such visit to Heather's resting place, Daredevil also encountered the villainous Vulture, who attempted to destroy Heather's grave. Marvelous verdict. So folks, that's how Matt Murdock and Heather Glenn's complicated love affair unfolded in the comics, and ended on a rather tragic note. However, in the show Daredevil Born Again, Dr. Heather Glenn has a very different personality and indeed brings out the best in Matt Murdock. And we hope this time their love story has a happier ending. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.